In today's class, we're going to talk about a beautiful story which is written by Khushwant Singh. Okay, we are going to talk about a story which is written by Khushwant Singh. Okay, so now here he describes a very beautiful story which is related to a lady which is related to a lady. So once when we start the lesson, you will understand the lady was young or the lady was old. Khushwant Singh was born on 2nd February 1912 and he took his last breath on 20th March 2014. I repeat, Khushwant Singh was born on 2nd February 1912 and took his last breath on 20th March 2014. His experience in 1947 partition of India inspired him to write Train to Pakistan in 1956, which became his most well-known novel. And he also have received Padma Bhushan Award. So this is about the Khushwant Singh, an author who wrote the story, The Portrait of a Lady. What is the meaning of portrait? Yes, it is the picture. It is a pen picture. It means where the author has an imagination about a lady. That is the meaning of portrait. I repeat, portrait means it is a picture. Portrait means it's a picture of a lady where he has described. Yes, now we shall start understanding what Khushwant Singh has written about a lady. My grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. What is Khushwant Singh telling about? Which lady? My grandmother. Yes, my old grandmother. As all of you have a grandmother, even I am describing about my grandmother. She has been old and wrinkled for the 20 years that I had known her. That is, he's telling, I had a grandma. From 20 years, I have known her, but she is old. Obviously, a grandmother will be old. That is what he's telling here. She had once been young and pretty and ever had a husband. But that was hard to believe. My grandfather's portrait hung above the mantelpiece in the drawing room. So, they used to tell, I had a grandmother. My grandmother was pretty and she was beautiful. But it was hard for me to believe that because from past 20 years, I am seeing her. My grandmother is the old lady here. And my grandfather's portrait hung above the mantelpiece. Mantelpiece means a structure of wood or a marble or stone above and around the fireplace, which will be kept in their room. Okay, mantelpiece. It is a structure of wood, marble or stone above and around the fireplace which would have been kept in their house. His long white beard covered the best part of his chest and he looked at least 100 years old. So now what happened here? Now the grandmother, she had a portrait of her husband, that is Khushwant Singh's grandfather. Now he is describing about his grandfather picture, How was the grandfather's picture? He had a long grown beard which was covered his best part of the chest. He describes that. And he also says, my grandfather was looking very old, as if he was 100 years old. He did not look a sort of a person who would have a wife or children. He says that I feel that my grandfather was so old that I could feel that he wouldn't have had a wife or he wouldn't have grandchildren. It was hard for me to believe. He looked as if he could only have lots and lots of grandchildren. He says, now, I don't think he would have had a wife. I would only feel that he looked as if he would have only lots and lots of grandchildren. As for my grandmother being young and pretty, the thought was almost revolting. She often told us of the games she used to play as a child that seemed quite absurd and undignified on her part, and we treated it like a fables of the prophets she used to tell us. Now here what happens, Kushwant, his grandmother used to tell all the thing what she has done when she was in his age in those days, what she used to do, how she used to play games and all that. But here Kushwant Singh was feeling as if it was just a story of the prophet, that is the God's story. He understood, he could take it as only the story, but he could not take it as a reality. She had always been short and fat and slightly bent. Her face was a crisscross of wrinkles running from everywhere to everywhere. Now here the author describes about the grandmother's physical appearance. How was the grandmother's physical appearance? She was short, she was fat, and slightly bent. Her face was crisscross of wrinkles running from everywhere to everywhere, like wrinkles all around. Usually when people get old, they'll be having a lines on their face and crisscrosses, the lines going that side and this side. That is how he's describing, like everywhere on her face, I can see this wrinkles. No, we were certain she had always been as we had known her, old. Now here what he says, I have known her only as an old lady. She is my grandmother. She is all said to be old now. So terribly old that she could not have grown older and had stayed at the same age for 20 years. She could never have been pretty, what he says. I have seen her for 20 years. She is the same. How could you tell that she was pretty? She was also always beautiful. She hobbled. Here, she was never been pretty, but she was beautiful. Here, the word she was beautiful means, with her behavior, the way she carried herself. He is describing here. He says, physical appearance is not pretty, but she was beautiful in her attitude, in her behavior, the way she carried herself, she was beautiful. She humbled about the house in spotless white with one hand resting on her waist to balance her stoop and the other telling the beads of her rosary. So now here what happened? He is telling that she was old and she had wrinkles on her face and she always used to wear a white cloth which was never dirty at all. Even a small stain was not there. She was so nice. She was so beautiful. I mean, he's talking about the behavior, the attitude, the way she carries herself. Okay. And she hobbled around the house in spotless white with one hand resting on her waist to balance her stoop, and the other telling the beads of her rosary. In those days, you all know that all our grandmas too were very much involved in the prayers, and they always used to go to the temple and they used to pray. They always used to pray. But in this generation, they say that we don't have time to pray. Okay, in those generations, this grandma, she was very much interested in doing her prayers. She counts the beads. That is, she starts to pray with the rosary. Her silver locks were scattered untidily over her pale. Here, her silver locks, which means her grey hair. Over her pale, it means dull, puckered face, and her lips constantly moved in inaudible prayer. It means that she was saying a prayer with the rosary beads, where it was inaudible, means it was not, we were not able to hear it. Yes, she was beautiful. She was like a landscape in the mountains, an expanse of pure white serenity, breathing peace and contentment. Here, the author describes how beautifully she says the prayer, and of course, she is beautiful. She was like a mountain which is covered with the snow. Here, the Kushwant Singh has beautifully described his grandma, saying, "My grandma wouldn't have looked pretty in her appearance, but she was beautiful in her inner sense. She was so nice, like a mountain which is covered with the snow. She was so beautiful." And she was always, serenity means calm and peace. My grandmother and I were good friends. So here what Kushwant Singh says, me and my grandmother, we were very good friends. My parents left me with her, obviously. Sometimes what happened when parents are working, we all were grown up by our grandparents. That is, even now these generation, the children are been growing with their grandparents. In the same way, even Kushwant's parents left Kushwant to his grandmother. My grandmother and I were good friends. My parents left me with her when they went to live in the city, and we were constantly together. Constantly means we were always together. She used to wake me up in the morning and get me ready for school. She said her morning prayers in a monotonous sing song. She used to tell her prayer in the morning while she bathed and dressed him. Like as she was giving him a bath and she was dressing him, she used to say the prayer. And me, in the hope that I would listen and get to know it by heart. She used to say the prayer as he was getting dressed for the school. She was helping him up, giving him bath, making him put on a clothes and all. She used to say the prayer. But what happened here? She wanted to say the prayer so that he will by heart the prayer. What had happened here? Uh, I would love to listen. I would love and get to know it by heart. I listened because I loved her voice, but never bothered to learn. So here, Kushan Singh, what happened? He used to listen to her prayer, but he was not so much careful in learning the prayer. He says that her voice was so beautiful that I was only listening and I did not bother to learn it. Then she would fetch my wooden slate, which she had already washed and plastered with yellow chalk, a tiny earthen ink pot, and a red pen, tied them all in a bundle and handed to me. So usually when the grandmother is taking care of the child, when the child is going to the school, it is her duty and responsibility to pack her bag, to pack her lunch, everything. So this is what she did it here. After my breakfast of thick, stale chapati with a little butter and sugar spread on it, we went to school. She carried several stale chapatis with her for the village dog. So now what happened? She packed here chapatis, Stale chapati. Stale chapati means it was not fresh, it was hard. After a breakfast of thick stale chapati with a little butter and sugar spread on it, we went to school. She carried several stale chapatis with her for the village dogs. So now what happened here? She packed she packed a food that was stale chapati and very thick chapatis with the sugar and butter spread on it. And also she carried few chapatis for the village dogs. My grandmother always went to school with me because the school was attached to the temple. The priest taught us the alphabet and the morning prayer, while the children sat in rows on either sides of the veranda, singing the alphabet or the prayers in a chorus. My grandmother sat inside reading the sculptures. So now what happened here? Both of them used to go to school, and even the grandma used to go to school because the school was attached to the temple, and she used to go there for the prayers. And the priest taught us the alphabet and in the morning prayer, while the children sat in the row on either of the veranda singing the alphabet or the prayers in the chorus. My grandmother sat inside reading the sculptures. When we had both finished, we would walk back together. That is after school and after her prayer, they would go back together home. This time the village dog would meet us at the temple door. This time the dogs met the grandma. This time the village dog would meet us at the temple door. Now what happened? The dogs met the grandmother at the temple door. They followed us to our home. Who followed? Dogs came behind them, growling and fighting with each other for the chapatis we threw to them. Because they threw the chapatis, the dogs came running behind them. When my parents were comfortable, settled in the city, they sent for us. Now here what happened? As grandmother and Kushwant Singh was in another place, and now they were invited for the city where their parents were staying. Now it was their time to come down to the city. That was the turning point in our friendship. In our friendship, whose friendship? That is the grandmother and Kushwant Singh friendship. Although we shared the same room, my grandmother no longer came to school with me. Now here what happened when they started to shift it to the city, in that old place, the grandmother used to take him to the school. She used to sit because it was attached with the temple. But here when they came to the city side, the grandmother did not go to the school. What happened? It was a turning point in our friendship. Although we shared the same room, my grandmother no longer came to school with me. I used to go to an English school in a motor bus. There were no dogs in the street, and she took for feeding sparrows in the courtyard of our city house. Now, courtyard means, the front place of that area. Now, here what happens? There were no dogs, there were only the sparrows. Now, she became friend with the sparrows and she started giving the food to sparrows. Sorry. As the years rolled by, we saw less of each other's. For some time, she continued to wake up and get me ready for school. So now what happens here in the city, the life was different. He was going to an English medium school and the school was not attached to the temple. So what happened here, the attachment is a little far. They were not together each other. Okay, so here little distance was maintained. When I came back, she would ask me what the teacher had taught you. I would tell her English words and little things of Western science and learning the law of gravity. Archimedes' principle, the world being round, he used when Kushwant Singh used to come home from the school, that is from the English medium school. Grandma used to ask, what did your teacher do? What did she teach? So he started to explain about in English, whereas she did not understand. The world being round, this made her unhappy because she thought what he is studying, she is not able to understand anything. So this thought made her feel unhappy. She could not help me with my lessons. She did not believe in the things they taught at the English school and was distressed that there was no teaching about God and the sculptures. She also felt that in this English medium school, they are not teaching anything about the God or the sculptures. He is not reading anything. She was very sad about it. She said nothing, but her silence meant disapproval. She rarely talked to me after that. So now what happened? It was slowly there was a gap between them, and this more of his education also made a little more gap, that she was very unhappy that he is going to a school and not studying anything about the god rituals and the sculptures. When I went up to university, I was given a room of my own. Now he is gone to the university and he was given his own room. The common link of friendship was snapped. My grandmother accepted her seclusion with resignation. She rarely left her spinning wheel to talk to anyone. Okay, now what happened? She was with the spinning wheel and she never used to talk to anyone. As he started to go to university, there were a little more gap within their communication. From sunrise to sunset, she sat by her wheel, spinning and reciting prayer. Now, what happened? Sunrise to sunset means till morning. From evening, she was only busy spinning the wheel and doing the prayer. Only in the afternoon she relaxed for a while to feed the sparrows. There in that place she had dogs to feed them, but here she could not find dogs, so she was having the sparrows. She used to take a break only to feed the sparrows. While she sat in the veranda breaking the beads into little bites, hundreds of birds collected round her, creating a veritable bedlam of chirpings. Some came and perched on her legs, but she never shooed them away. It used to be the happiest half hour of the day for her. She used to enjoy with the birds who used to come near her house, and she used to throw some food for the birds and the birds used to enjoy, and she also used to enjoy that watching, and the sounds of the bird was making her happy. This was her half a day of the routine. When I decided to go abroad for further studies, I was sure my grandmother would be upset. Now what happened? Now what he thought, if I now it was a time for him to travel to abroad for his further studies. So he thought that maybe my grandmother will feel bad that if I go. So what happened? I would be away for 5 years. And at her age, one could never tell. But my grandma could. She was not even sentimental. Now, he was feeling something emotion that if I tell my grandma about my higher studies going to abroad, she may become emotion. But nothing happened. She did not show her sentimental. She came to leave me at the railway station, but did not talk or show any emotion. She didn't even speak any word, but she also did not express her sadness, that is her emotion. Her lips moved in prayers. She was always into the prayers. So when he was at the railway station, she was only doing the prayer. Her mind was lost in prayer. Her fingers were busy telling the beads of her rosary. Telling the beads of the rosary means she was doing her prayers. Silently, she kissed my forehead, and when I left, I cherished the moist imprint as perhaps the last sign of physical contact between us. So now here what happened? She was doing her prayers. Finally, she controlled her emotions. She just kissed him at his forehead. And what happened here? Silently, she kissed my forehead, and when I left, I cherished the moist in print as perhaps the last sign of physical contact between us. He felt that this must be the physical contact between us. But that was not so. After 5 years, I came back home. He thought this would be the physical contact because after 5 years, I might not see my grandma. He felt, but that was not sure. After 5 years, I came back home and I met her at the station. She did not look a day older. She was the same. He says he was after 5 years. Also, my grandmother was grandmother to me. She was old as usual. She still had no time for words, and while she slapped me in her arms, I could hear her reciting her prayers. Now, what happened when he came down after his 5 years of education? So, what happened here? She just took him in his palm, and she could feel her happiness, but she could not express anything. She was only reciting the prayer. Even on the first day of my arrival, her happiest movements were with her sorrows, whom she fed longer, and with ferocious rebuffs. Means here, even when I came, even when I came, I could see the sparrows, her enjoyment. She was giving the food, she was feeding the sparrows. I could feel that enjoyment he is telling. Even after his arrival, he could see that happiest moment was that she was with the sparrow. In the evening, a change came over. Now, what happened? One day evening, a change which took place. She did not pray. She collected the women of the neighborhood, got an old drum ass, and started to sing. She collected an old drum and she started to sing. Where she did not pray anything on that evening. She did not pray anything, or either she did not do anything. She just took an old drum and started to sing. For several hours and thumped the sagging skin of dilapidated drum and sang of the homecoming of the warriors. Now she felt that because of the age factor, something was going wrong, something she had the sign that her days have come to end. So due to the age factor, this all is happening. She felt that she had to persuade herself to stop to avoid overstraining. That was the first time since I ever known her that she did not pray, and that was the first time. Although she was worried, although she was having uh, uh, some some signs that something is going to happen. That was the first time, Kushwant Singh says that that was the first time I saw her never in the prayers. I have always seen her doing her prayers, counting her rosaries, but this is the first time I have seen without doing any prayers. The next morning she was taken ill. It was a mild fever, and the doctor told us that it would go. But my grandmother thought differently. She told us that her end was near, so she came to know that this will be her last breath. They wanted to do something to the grandmother, but what happened? She says, no, this is my end of the life. She said that since only a few hours before the close of the last chapter of her life, she had omitted to pray. That is, she says, this was the last scenario what happened into her life, and she could not pray. And what had happened, she was not going to waste any more talking to us. So that was the last time he had seen her without the prayers. We protested, but she ignored our protest. She lay peacefully in bed praying and telling her beads. Even before she could suspect, her lips stopped moving and the rosary fell from her fearless fingers. The peace pallor spread on her face and we knew that she was dead. And here what happened? That they wanted to protect her, that they wanted to help her, but she ignored saying that no. She ignored saying that, so she finally laid into peaceful, having the rosary telling her beads. We protested, but she ignored our protest. She lay peacefully in bed, praying and telling her beads. Even before she could suspect, her lips stopped moving and the rosary fell from her fearless fingers. The peaceful pallor spread on her face, and we knew that she was dead. At the end of the scenario, at the end of the sequence here, what happened? They all got to know that she was no more. The sun was setting and had lit her room and veranda with blaze of golden light. We stopped halfway in the courtyard, all over the veranda and in her room, right up to where she lay dead and stiff wrapped in the red shroud. Thousands of sparrows sat scattered on the floor. So what happened? The grandmother, when she was no more, all the sparrows had come there and all the sparrows gathered together and they were on the floor, sorry. There were no crumping. We felt sorry for the birds, and my mother fetched some bread for them. So now, what happened when the grandmother was no more, and even the birds were never making any of the noise? So, what happened here? His mother gave some food to the sparrows. When they carried my grandmother's crops off, they flew away quietly. Here, what happened when the grandmother was carried to when the grandmother was carried and none of the birds were making noise and they all flew very quietly and next morning the sweeper swept the breadcrumbs into the dustbin because of the sadness the sparrows also did not have the food which was spread by Kushwan's mother. It was not eaten by the sparrow. Children, I hope you understood the story. It is really very nice and touching story. Okay, let's have the meaning revision. Mantelpiece, as I told you, a structure of wood, marble, or a stone above and around a fireplace. Absorbed, illogical, and inappropriate. Okay, absorbed, illogical, and inappropriate. Serenity, calm and peaceful. Serenity, calm and peaceful. Tail, which is not fresh. Tail, which is not fresh. I hope you understood and enjoyed the lesson, the portrait of a lady. Thank you, children.